The cafeteria tray hovered 3 inches above the table, vibrating with a low, unhappy hum that suggested it was contemplating treason against the laws of physics. Mason Hale watched it with the weary patience of someone who had spent too much time repairing old engines and not enough time sleeping. He reached out, placing a calloused hand on the floating polymer surface, and gently forced it down until the magnetic locks engaged with a decisive click. The tray settled, surrendering its brief rebellion. "You know," Mason said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if you let your lunch float away every day, people are going to think you are training it to be a satellite." Across the table, Nima did not smile. She rarely did. The Oralin girl sat with her shoulders hunched inward, as if trying to occupy the smallest possible volume of space within the vast vaulted ceiling of the Diplomatic Academy cafeteria. Her skin, a pale, iridescent lavender, typical of her species, was currently dull, lacking the healthy shimmer that indicated a strong connection to the choir. She stared at the nutrient cubes on her tray, blue, gelatinous, and trembling slightly, as though they were judging her. "Eat," Mason urged gently. "Gravity is working again. Take advantage of it while it lasts." Around them, the cafeteria was a symphony of light and soft, melodious humming. The academy was built into the side of a glowing fungal forest on the moon of Meridian, and the architecture reflected that biological heritage. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting in a slow rhythm that cycled fresh oxygen. The windows were not glass, but translucent membranes that bloomed open like flower petals when the ambient temperature rose. To the Oralin students, this was home. To Mason, the only human employee in the sector who was not a diplomat, it felt like living inside the stomach of a very polite beast. He watched Nima pick up her fork. Her hand trembled. The movement was jerky, lacking the fluid grace that characterized the Oralin species. A group of older students walked past their table. They were tall, their movements synchronized as if they were dancing to music only they could hear. As they passed Nima, they arc wide, leaving a gap of 5 feet between them and her chair. They did not look at her. They did not speak to her. Their eyes glazed over, sliding past her existence, as if she were a smudge on a camera lens that their brains automatically edited out. This was the unspoken law of the Oralin: do not engage with the discordant. Nima was discordant. In a society where communication happened primarily through the choir, a planetary empathy field that linked every mind in a web of shared emotion, Nima was static. She was a broken radio. Her connection was intermittent, filled with spikes of pain and panic that could bleed into the minds of those around her. So they isolated her. They treated her with a polite, terrified distance, fearing that her brokenness might be contagious. Mason felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, a mix of protective anger and stubbornness. He was 24 years old, built like a hauler, with broad shoulders and hands that were permanently stained with lubricant from the library's archive drones. He did not fit here. He was too loud, too solid, too singular. He reached into the pocket of his gray utility vest and pulled out a small physical book. It was an antique paper and ink smelling of vanilla and decay. He slid it across the table, bypassing the holographic interfaces that the other students used. "Found this in the sub-basement archives," Mason said. "Old Earth mythology. Something about a guy who holds up the sky. Figured you might like it." Nima looked up. Her eyes were large, entirely black, reflecting the bioluminescent moss hanging from the ceiling. For a second, the dullness in her skin shifted, a faint pulse of warm amber light flickering deep beneath the dermis. She reached out and touched the book. She did not say thank you. Verbal language was difficult for her, a secondary tool, but the amber pulse was enough. "Mason," a voice crackled in his earpiece. "Section 4 needs a cleanup. Someone spilled a kinetic drink." Mason sighed, tapping his ear. "On my way." He looked back at Nima. "I will be back in 10 minutes to clear your tray. Eat the blue stuff. It is supposed to be good for your—" He waved a hand vaguely at her head. Signal. He stood up, his heavy boots clanking on the crystalline floor. As he walked away, he felt the eyes of the other students on him. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and revulsion. To them, he was a brute. A creature who communicated by flapping meat together in his throat, who carried things with his hands instead of using telekinetic assists, who associated with the glitch girl. He could hear his father's voice in his head clear as a bell. Grant Hale had been a sergeant in the 1st Interspecies Peacekeeping Force, a man who had seen too much and said too little. You help people, Mason. That is what we do. That is how we keep our humanity when the galaxy tries to strip it away. But listen to me. Do not let them turn you into a tool. There is a difference between being a shield and being a disposable wall. I am just carrying a lunch tray, Dad, Mason muttered to himself as he navigated the crowded aisle. I am not saving the universe. He was wrong. The change happened in the space between two heartbeats. One moment the cafeteria was filled with the low murmur of 1,000 telepathic conversations and the clinking of silverware. The next, the air pressure dropped so sharply that Mason's ears popped painfully. The light in the room shifted. The warm, golden bioluminescence of the walls turned a sickly, bruised purple. The hum of the ventilation system died, replaced by a sound that Mason felt in his teeth. Rather than his ears, a high-pitched drilling screech that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, the silence hit. It was not a natural silence. It was not the absence of noise. It was the null hymn. It was a psychic void, a sudden violent tear in the choir that connected every Orlin on the moon. Around him, the students screamed, not with their voices, but with their bodies. Hundreds of Orlin students clutched their heads, simultaneously dropping to their knees as if their strings had been cut. Trays flew into the air, propelled by uncontrolled bursts of telekinetic panic. Glass shattered. The gravity plates in the floor malfunctioned, sending tables drifting upward before slamming them back down with bone-breaking force. Mason staggered, grabbing a pillar to steady himself. The vertigo was nauseating, but his mind was his own. He was human. He was deaf to the choir, and for once his deafness was a superpower. Nema, he gasped. He turned back toward the table he had just left. The scene was a nightmare. The gravity around Nema's table had gone haywire. Her lunch tray was spinning violently in midair, spraying blue gelatin like shrapnel. But Nema was the epicenter. She was convulsing in her chair. Her back was arched, her head thrown back, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her skin was flashing rapidly, blinding white, terrified red void, black strobe lighting the area around her. The air around her rippled with visible distortion waves, the sheer force of her psychic distress warping the light. "Stay back," an instructor shouted. It was a tall Orlin professor, clutching the edge of a doorway, his face pale. "She is cascading, do not touch her. She will burn out your neural pathways." The other students were scrambling away, crawling over each other, to get as far from the glitch as possible. To them, Nema was a bomb exploding in the emotional spectrum. To touch her now would be to drown in a tidal wave of pure, unfiltered agony. Mason did not hesitate. He did not think about neural pathways. He did not think about the academy rules regarding physical contact. He saw a terrified child shaking apart in a room full of people who were too connected to help her. He pushed off the pillar, fighting the erratic gravity. He dodged a flying metal pitcher and vaulted over a toppled bench. He reached Nema in 3 long strides. "I have got you!" he roared over the shrieking noise of the null hymn. "I have got you, Nema!" He grabbed her shoulders. The shock was immediate, a static discharge that zapped up his arms and made his teeth ache, but it was physical, not mental. He could handle physical. She was rigid, her muscles locked in a tetanic seizure. Mason pulled her out of the chair, dragging her down to the floor, where the gravity was slightly more stable. He sat with his back against the overturned table, pulled her into his lap, and wrapped his arms around her small, vibrating frame. "Breathe," he commanded, pressing his chest against her back so she could feel the rhythm of his own lungs. "Ignore the noise. Feel the floor. Feel my arms. You are here. You are solid." Nima thrashed her head, striking his shoulder hard enough to bruise. The light from her skin was blinding, illuminating the terrified faces of the crowd watching them. Mason did not let go. He tightened his grip, applying deep, crushing pressure, a technique his father had taught him for panic attacks. "Ground yourself," Mason gritted out, closing his eyes against the strobe effect. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. He became an anchor. In a world of fluid minds and shifting energies, he was a rock. He projected nothing. He received nothing. He simply was. And slowly, impossibly, the storm broke against him. The screeching noise in the air began to recede, fading, like a dying siren. The flickering lights stabilized, returning to their warm gold. The gravity plates stopped shuddering. In his arms, Nima went limp. The frantic flashing of her skin slowed, settling into a dim, exhausted gray. She took a gasping, ragged breath, then another. Her hands, which had been clawing at the air, curled into the fabric of Mason's vest, clutching it with desperate strength. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was real silence now, not the psychic void of the null hymn. Mason opened his eyes. The entire cafeteria was staring at him. 300 students and a dozen faculty members stood frozen, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. They looked at him as if he had just wrestled a demon into submission with his bare hands. The professor who had warned him to stay back stepped forward, his robes disheveled. He looked at Nima, then at Mason, then at his own hands. He seemed ashamed, though he tried to hide it behind a mask of academic curiosity. "The resonance," the professor whispered. "It stopped. The cascade stopped." "She is just a kid," Mason said, his voice rough. He loosened his grip slightly, but kept Nima tucked against his side. "She was scared. Pain makes noise. You help the pain, you stop the noise. It is not quantum physics." A shadow fell over them. Mason looked up. Standing over him was Cora. She was young for a royal guard, perhaps only a few years older than Mason, but she carried herself with the density of a collapsed star. Her armor was woven from white ceramic and silver thread, and her face was a mask of professional indifference. She held a datapad in one hand, her stylus hovering over the screen. "Subject Mason Hale," Cora said. Her voice was cool, crisp, and utterly devoid of the trembling fear that infected everyone else. "Status non-Oralin. Position library assistant." "Is there a fine for hugging students?" Mason asked, checking Nima's pulse. It was fast, but steady. "Because I do not get paid until next week." Cora lowered the datapad. Her eyes, a piercing shade of silver, locked onto his. "You did not just hug a student, Mr. Hale. You made the choir quiet. The null hymn was peaking. It should have lasted another 4 minutes. It ended the moment you applied pressure." "I told you," Mason said, standing up and lifting Nima effortlessly into his arms. The girl buried her face in his neck, hiding from the world. "I just made a kid stop hurting." "That," Cora said, tapping her stylus against her chin, "is a distinction the council might find difficult to parse." She stepped aside, allowing him a path to the exit. "Take her to the infirmary. Dr. Soren Vale is already prepping a stasis bed. Do not stop for anyone." Mason nodded, adjusting his grip on Nima. He walked through the silent crowd, feeling the weight of their stare physically on his skin. He felt like an intruder in a temple, a muddy boot on a white carpet, but he held his head high. High above the cafeteria, behind the one-way molecular glass of the observation spire, 2 figures watched the monitor. Emperor Solara stood with her hands clasped behind her back. She was tall, regal, and radiating a beauty that was almost painful to look at. Her robes were made of living light that shifted color, with her mood currently a thoughtful, deep indigo. She had arrived in Meridian only an hour ago, for an unscheduled inspection, a secret attempt to understand why her city was tearing itself apart. She had expected to see structural failures. She had expected to see incompetent bureaucrats. She had not expected to see a human library assistant wrestle a psychic singularity into submission. "Did you see the readings, Your Highness?" The voice came from the shadows behind her. Regent Alden Rook stepped into the light. He was an older Orlin, his skin etched with the intricate silver tattoos of the High Council. He looked like a benevolent grandfather, the kind who gave sweets to children, but Solara knew that his kindness was as calculated as a mathematical equation. "I saw," Solara said softly. Her voice sounded tired. The null hymn spiked to critical levels. It should have shattered the windows. It should have hospitalized half the student body. "And yet," Rook said, gesturing to the screen, where Mason was carrying Nima out of the frame. It dissolved, dissipated, like smoke in a gale. Rook tapped the glass with a long, manicured fingernail, right over Mason's image. "A human," Rook mused, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. "A creature with zero psychic latency. A void in the choir. And yet he achieved what our best harmonious healers could not." "He showed compassion, Alden," Solara said, turning to face him. "Something the Academy seems to have forgotten how to teach." "Compassion is a variable," Rook corrected smoothly. "Mechanics are constants. That human is not just a janitor, Your Highness. He acts as a grounding rod, a dampener. Do you realize what that means?" Solara looked back at the empty cafeteria. She felt the heavy weight of the crown on her brow, the endless screaming noise of the choir that she had to filter every second of every day. She thought of her daughter, hidden away in the shadows, and the secret she carried that was slowly killing them both. "It means," Solara said, "that we have found a curiosity." "No," Rook whispered, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that made Solara's skin crawl. "It means we have found a key." The infirmary was quiet, smelling of ozone and antiseptic herbs. Mason laid Nima down on the biobed. The gel mattress instantly molded to her shape, glowing with a soft green light as it began to scan her vitals. Dr. Soren Vale, a frantic Orlin with wild white hair and spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, rushed over. He waved a scanner over Nima, muttering to himself in a rapid-fire dialect of medical Orlin. "Cortisol levels stabilizing," Dr. Vale mumbled. "Synaptic firing returning to normal parameters. Incredible. Simply incredible. If I had not seen the logs, I would say she was merely sleeping." He looked at Mason, blinking owlishly. You held her through the discharge." "Yeah," Mason said, flexing his hands. They felt stiff, his muscles aching from the tension. "Is she going to be okay?" "She will sleep for 12 hours, Dr. Vale said. "But yes, she is safe, thanks to whatever it is you did." Mason looked down at the sleeping girl. Her face was peaceful now, the pain smoothed away. He felt a strange tug in his chest, a sense of responsibility that went beyond his job description. He remembered his father's warning again. Do not become a tool. But looking at Nima, Mason thought that if being a tool meant keeping this kid safe from a world that wanted to erase her, then maybe he did not mind being a hammer. "I should get back," Mason said. "My shift is not over and I left a mess in the cafeteria." "Of course," Dr. Vale said, already distracted by his data screens. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." Mason walked out of the infirmary and into the long, curving corridor of the academic wing. The lights were dim here, mimicking the twilight of the surface forest. He was alone. He rubbed his wrist. It was itching. A sharp, stinging sensation like a bee sting or a static shock. He rolled up the sleeve of his gray uniform. There, on the underside of his left wrist, right over the pulse point, was a mark. It was faint, glowing with a pale, pearlescent white light. It looked like a fracture line, a jagged streak of lightning frozen in his skin. Mason stopped. He rubbed it with his thumb. The skin felt hot to the touch. "What in the world?" he whispered. He blinked, and the light vanished. The mark faded instantly, leaving only smooth, unblemished skin. Mason stared at his wrist for a long moment. He looked up at the ceiling lights, watching them flicker slightly as the building's biosystems adjusted to the night cycle. "Just the lights," Mason muttered to himself, pulling his sleeve back down. "Just a trick of the lights. I need sleep." He forced a laugh, a short, hollow sound in the empty hallway. "Next time," he said to the empty air, "I am definitely letting the tray float." He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silence, unaware that the silence was listening, and that for the first time in 1,000 years, it had heard an answer. The sponge in Mason Hale's hand was gray, the table was gray, and the mood in the cafeteria was a distinct shade of apprehensive gray. It had been 24 hours since the incident with the floating tray, and the Diplomatic Academy was treating Mason like he was a walking radiation leak. Students did not look at him. If he walked down an aisle, the Orlan teenagers would seamlessly part, like a school of fish, leaving a precise 3-foot gap between their robes and his utility vest. It was efficient, silent, and incredibly alienating. Mason scrubbed a stubborn patch of dried nutrient paste from table 12. He was trying to ignore the sensation of being watched, but his neck prickled. He turned around. Cora stood there. The Royal Guard did not look like she belonged in a cafeteria. Her white, ceramic armor gleamed under the bioluminescent moss lights, and her silver eyes were fixed on him with the intensity of a targeting laser. She held a scroll in her hand, not a data pad, but an actual physical scroll made of woven light fibers. "Mason Hale," she said. Her voice cut through the ambient hum of the room. "You are required." Mason dropped the sponge into his bucket with a wet splash. "I am required to finish my shift. The subsector manager gets very emotional if the tables are sticky." "The request supersedes the subsector manager," Cora stated. She extended the scroll. "It is from the Spire." The cafeteria went dead silent. The Spire was not just a building. It was the seat of the Orlan Empire, the needle that pierced the sky of Meridian. Invitations from the Spire did not come to library assistants who scrubbed tables. Mason wiped his hands on his pants. He took the scroll. It felt warm, vibrating slightly against his skin. "Am I being arrested?" "You are being summoned," Cora corrected. "There is a distinction." "Usually the distinction involves handcuffs," a gruff voice said from the kitchen doorway. Grant Hale stepped out. He was wiping a ceramic plate with a rag, his movements slow and deliberate. Mason's father looked older than his 50 years. The war had left him with a stiff leg and eyes that always seemed to be scanning for exits. He limped over to the table, placing himself physically between Cora and his son. "He is a citizen of the Earth Coalition," Grant said, his voice low. "He has rights. If you are taking him, I am coming with him." Cora looked at Grant. She did not sneer, but her expression tightened. "The invitation is for Mason Hale alone. Your presence would add unnecessary noise to the choir within the Spire. You are not compatible." "I am not noise," Grant snapped. "I am his father." "Dad, it is fine," Mason said, putting a hand on Grant's shoulder. He could feel the tension radiating off the older man. Grant hated the Orlan government. He hated the way they looked at humans as if they were simple-minded tools to be used and discarded. "It is probably just about the incident yesterday. They want a statement." Grant looked at Mason, his jaw set. "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. You tell them you are a janitor, not a diplomat." Mason forced a smile. "I will tell them I am a library assistant. It sounds better on the resume." He turned to Cora. "If this is a kidnapping, can I at least get my jacket? It gets cold in the upper atmosphere." Cora blinked. The joke seemed to bounce off her armor. "The Aurum Spire maintains a constant temperature of 22 degrees Celsius. Your thermal regulation will be adequate. We are leaving now. She turned on her heel and walked toward the exit without looking back. Mason squeezed his father's shoulder one last time. I will be back for dinner. Save me the red stuff. I think the blue stuff is trying to kill me. Grant did not smile. He watched his son walk away, his grip tightening on the rag in his hand until his knuckles turned white. The transport pod was a teardrop of glass and silver that moved through the city's magnetic currents with terrifying speed. Mason watched the world blur past. They rose above the fungal forests, above the residential rings ascending toward the glittering needle that dominated the skyline. The Aurum Spire was not built. It was grown. It spiraled upward like a twisted horn of crystal and white metal, pulsing with a rhythmic light that matched the heartbeat of the city. As they approached the docking bay, Mason felt it. It started as a pressure behind his eyes, then moved to his teeth. It was a hum, a vibration that was not sound, but sensation. It was the choir. Down in the city, the mental network of the Orlin was a background noise, like the buzz of a refrigerator. Here at the center of power, it was a jet engine. This was the nexus, where millions of minds connected, filtered, and resonated. Mason rubbed his temples. Does it always get this loud? Cora glanced at him from the pilot's seat. You hear nothing. You are human. You are deaf to the choir. My headache disagrees with you, Mason muttered. It feels like standing inside a speaker. That is merely the psionic pressure on your primitive nervous system, Cora said dismissively. Try not to faint. It creates paperwork. The pod docked with a soft hiss. The doors bloomed open. They were met, not by guards, but by silence. The corridors of the spire were vast, arched, like the inside of a ribcage. The walls were made of a translucent material that shifted colors, pale rose, soft gold, deep violet. Light did not come from fixtures. It emanated from the air itself. Mason followed Cora. His boots sounded impossibly loud on the crystalline floor. Every step echoed a harsh clack-clack against the fluid, silent grace of the architecture. They reached a set of massive double doors that looked like two hands clasped together in prayer. The doors parted without a sound. The room beyond was an observatory. The walls were missing, replaced by a force field that offered a 360-degree view of the moon and the gas giant it orbited. In the center of the room, surrounded by floating rings of holographic data, stood a woman. She did not look like the holograms Mason had seen on the news feeds. In the broadcasts, Emperor Solara was a being of pure light and benevolence. Here in the flesh, she looked exhausted. Solara was tall, her skin the color of polished moonstone. She wore robes of deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her hair was a cascading waterfall of white strands that floated slightly defying gravity. But her eyes were what caught Mason. They were ancient, heavy, and sharp as broken glass. She waved a hand, and the holographic rings dispersed like smoke. "Leave us, Cora," Solara said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the air vibrate. Cora bowed deeply, her fist over her heart, and backed out of the room. The doors sealed shut. Mason stood alone with the ruler of the Meridian system. He fought the urge to wipe his hands on his pants again. "Mason Hale," Solara said. She did not turn to face him immediately. She continued to look out at the city below. "Son of Grant Hale, age 24, occupation library assistant sector 4, academic record average, disciplinary record minor insubordination." "I prefer creative interpretation of the rules," Mason said. Solara turned. Her gaze hit him like a physical impact. She studied him, scanning him from his scuffed boots to his messy, dark hair. It was not a look of curiosity. It was an appraisal. She was looking at him the way a mechanic looks at a wrench. "You are not intimidated," Solara noted. "I am terrified," Mason said honestly. But my father taught me that if you are going to be scared, you might as well be scared standing up. Solara walked toward him. She moved with an eerie smoothness, her feet barely seeming to touch the floor. Yesterday you stopped a null hymn cascade. You stabilized a resonant divergence in a child who should have shattered the local choir. I helped Nima, Mason said. She was hurting. Nima is fragile, Solara said, choosing the word carefully. Her connection to the choir is flawed. When the null hymn strikes, she becomes a conduit for chaos. Our healers cannot touch her during an episode without risking their own minds. Yet you held her. I am grounded, Mason shrugged. That is what the doctor said. I am a dead zone. You are a dampener, Solara corrected. You are silence in a room full of screaming. And that makes you useful. She stopped, 3 feet from him. The air around her smelled of ozone and rain. I am assigning you to the palace annex, Solara stated. You will be transferred from the library. Your primary duty will be to remain within proximity of Nima during peak resonance hours. Mason blinked. You want me to babysit? I want you to be a blast shield, Solara said coldly. The null hymn is increasing in frequency. The instability is growing. I cannot afford to have Nima disrupt the choir every time the wind changes. Something in Mason's chest tightened. It was the tone. She spoke of Nima not as a person, but as a faulty component in a machine. No, Mason said. Solara paused. Her eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. Excuse me. I said no, Mason repeated. I am not a piece of equipment you can just requisition. I help Nima because I like her, because she is a sweet kid who gets treated like a leper by everyone on this moon. I do it because I want to, not because you ordered me to become a piece of furniture in your palace. Solara stared at him. For a moment, Mason thought she might vaporize him. The air in the room grew heavy, the pressure in his skull spiking. Your want is irrelevant, Solara said, her voice dropping to a chill whisper. Your want produces results. Efficiency is a resource, Mr. Hale. And right now, my city is bleeding efficiency. Then fix the city, Mason shot back. Do not use a child as a patch. The doors hissed open behind them. Dr. Soren Vale bustled in, holding a tray of glowing vials. He stopped, sensing the tension in the room, thick enough to cut with a knife. Am I interrupting? The doctor squeaked. Solara broke eye contact with Mason. She turned away, her shoulders slumping slightly. The terrifying emperor vanished for a second, replaced by a tired woman. Explain it to him, doctor, Solara said, waving a hand wearily. He requires context. Dr. Vale adjusted his spectacles. He looked at Mason with a mixture of admiration and pity. Mr. Hale, please. It is not as simple as fixing a machine. He tapped a button on a console, and a large, holographic projection of the moon appeared. It was covered in a web of golden lines, the choir. But the web was not perfect. There were dark, jagged tears running through it. The null hymn, Dr. Vale said, pointing to the tears. It is not an attack. It is a structural failure. The collective consciousness of our people is cracking. We do not know why. When a wave hits it, creates a feedback loop of panic. He pointed to a small, bright red dot on the map. Nima, the doctor said softly. She has what we call hyper-empathy. She feels the cracks before anyone else. She amplifies them. It is agony for her, and it is dangerous for the city. When you hold her, you block the signal. You give her a quiet space to breathe. Mason looked at the map. He looked at the red dot. He thought of Nima sitting alone at the table, watching her lunch tray float away. I am not doing it for you, Mason said, looking at Solara's back. And I am not doing it for the Empire. Solara turned her head slightly. I do not care who you do it for, Mr. Hale, as long as it is done. The palace annex was a softer version of the spire. It was a garden wing filled with plants that sang softly when the breeze touched them. Mason found Nima in a classroom that was far too large for one student. She was sitting on a floating cushion, staring at a holographic puzzle floating in the air. When Mason walked in, she froze. She turned slowly. Her big black eyes widened. The dull gray of her skin flushed with a sudden warm amber. She did not smile, but she lowered the puzzle. She patted the empty cushion next to her. Mason sat down. He felt out of place in his gray work uniform amidst all the silk and light, but Nima did not seem to care. "Hey," Mason said softly. "Nice place. A bit shiny, though." Nima reached out and touched his arm. She didn't grasp it. She just rested her fingertips on his sleeve. Mason watched as the skin of her hand pulsed with a steady rhythmic light. He realized then what was happening. The air in the room felt different. The low-level hum that always permeated Orlan buildings seemed to recede around them, creating a bubble of stillness. It was peaceful. Nima closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that day. She was using him, but not like Solara wanted to use him. She was using him like a drowning person uses a raft. "Is it loud?" Mason asked. "In your head." Nima opened her eyes. She nodded slowly. Then she pointed at Mason's chest. "Quiet," her gesture seemed to say. Mason sat there for an hour. He did not do anything. He just sat and let Nima do her puzzle. He realized with a start that the doctor was right. The silence he brought was not just internal. The plants near them stopped singing. The holographic dust motes slowed down. He was a walking void, and for Nima, he was paradise. Later that evening, a servant drone floated in, carrying a silver platter. "Compliments of the Emperor," the drone's synthesized voice announced. Mason lifted the cover. It was a sandwich. But it was the most over-engineered sandwich he had ever seen. The bread was cut into a perfect hexagon. The vegetables were arranged in a fractal pattern. The sauce was applied in a precise spiral. Solara walked into the room a moment later. She had changed into simpler robes, though they still looked like they cost more than Mason's entire life earnings. "Is the nutrition satisfactory?" she asked stiffly. Mason picked up the sandwich. He took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully. "It is beautiful," Mason said. "Truly, it belongs in a museum." "But," Solara asked. "But it tastes like math," Mason said. "It is soulless. No offense." Solara frowned. She looked genuinely confused. "I do not understand. The nutrient balance is optimal. The flavor profile was synthesized from the most popular aggregate data. What chemical compound is missing?" "What is soul?" Mason laughed. It was a genuine laugh, and it seemed to startle Solara. "Soul is not a chemical, Your Highness," Mason said. "Soul is imperfections. It is the cook burning the crust a little bit. It is too much pepper because their hand slipped. It is making it because you want someone to be happy, not because you want them to reach optimal caloric intake." Solara stared at the sandwich. "Imperfection is inefficiency. Inefficiency leads to the null hymn." "Maybe," Mason said, taking another bite. "Or maybe trying to be perfect all the time is what is breaking you." Solara looked at him sharply. For a second, the mask slipped. He saw a flash of profound loneliness in her eyes. Then, the walls came back up. "Your shift ends at 2200 hours, she said icily. "Quarters have been prepared for you in the East Wing." She turned to leave. "Hey," Mason called out. She stopped. "Thank you for the sandwich," he said. "Even if it does taste like geometry." Solara did not look back, but Mason thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Sleep was impossible. The bed was too soft, the room was too quiet, and Mason's mind was racing. At 2 a.m, he gave up. He pulled on his boots and wandered out into the corridor. The palace slept, but the lights never truly went out. They just dimmed to a slumberous blue. He found himself walking toward the observation deck of the annex. It was a long balcony that overlooked the sleeping city. He was not alone. Solara was there, She was standing at the railing looking out at the darkness. She was not wearing her robes of state. She wore a simple white tunic that made her look smaller, more fragile. Mason stopped in the shadows. He did not want to intrude, but he could not look away. Solara was shaking. Her hands were gripping the railing so hard that the metal was groaning. Her head was bowed. She was not crying. Orolans did not cry in the human sense. But she was vibrating. Her skin was flashing rapidly. Dull gray, frantic violet, panicked white. The null hymn. Mason could hear it faintly in the distance, a low rumble like approaching thunder. But Solara was hearing it at full volume. She was the Emperor. She was the central node. She was holding the entire psychic weight of the city on her shoulders, and right now, that weight was crushing her. She let out a sound, a low keen of pure exhaustion. It was the sound of something breaking. Mason took a step forward. His boots scuffed the floor. Solara spun around. The speed was terrifying. In a split second, the vulnerability vanished. Her posture straightened, her face smoothed into a mask of regal indifference, and her hands released the railing to clasp composedly behind her back. "You are out of bounds, Mr. Hale," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wild. "I could not sleep," Mason said, keeping his voice low. He walked up to the railing, standing a few feet away from her. He did not look at her. He looked out at the city. "It is loud tonight." "The resonance is elevated," Solara admitted. "You are shaking," Mason said. "I am cold," Solara lied. Mason unzipped his utility vest. He took it off. It was heavy, lined with thermal fleece, and smelled faintly of library dust and engine grease. He held it out to her. "Here," he said. Solara looked at the vest. She looked at Mason. "I do not require." "It is just a vest, Solara," Mason said, dropping the title. "Take it, please." She hesitated. Then, with a hand that still trembled, she took the vest. She draped it over her shoulders. It was comically large on her, swallowing her slender frame. She pulled it tight. "It is heavy." "It is grounding," Mason said. They stood in silence for a long time. The null hymn rumbled in the distance, but Solara seemed to settle. The shaking stopped. "They think I am iron," Solara whispered, almost to herself. "The council, the people. They think the Emperor is part of the architecture, but iron breaks Mason. It does not bend. It just snaps." "Then do not be iron," Mason said. "Be something else. Be water. Be wood." "I do not have that luxury," Solara said. "If I bend, Meridian falls." While Mason stood on the balcony deep in the bowels of the council chambers, Regent Alden Rook was busy. He sat in a room made of dark obsidian, the walls lined with data streams. Across the table sat 3 members of the High Media Directorate. "The narrative needs to be adjusted," Rook said smoothly. He slid a data crystal across the table. "The human Mason Hale. He is not a hero. He is a contaminant." "The footage from the cafeteria is popular, Regent," one of the directors said. "People see him saving the child." "People see what we tell them to see," Rook countered. "Look at the data. When the human touches the Orolan, the connection drops. He severs the choir. He is a void." Rook leaned forward, his silver tattoos shimmering in the low light. "Spin it. Tell them that prolonged contact with humans degrades Orolan neural pathways. Tell them that the null hymn is being exacerbated by discordant biological elements. Create fear." "And the Emperor?" the director asked. "Rector. She has taken him into the spire." Rook smiled. It was a cold, reptilian expression. "Exactly. She has brought the infection into the heart of the city. When the next wave hits, and it will hit soon, the people will need to blame someone. Let them blame the stranger, and let them question the leader who invited him in." The attack came 2 days later. It was not a physical attack. It was a tsunami of silence. Mason was in the garden with Nima. They were planting crystal seeds in the soil. Mason was showing her how to get dirt under her fingernails. Then, the sky turned black. The ambient light of the dome flickered and died. The null hymn hit with the force of a physical blow. Mason was knocked off his feet. Nema screamed. This time, there was no build-up. She instantly went into a grand mal seizure, her body arching off the ground. The psychic shockwave that exploded from her shattered the nearby planters. Shards of crystal flew through the air. Nema. Mason scrambled toward her. He grabbed her, pulling her against his chest. But this time, it was not enough. The wave was too strong. Nema was burning up, her skin flashing with such intensity that Mason had to squeeze his eyes shut. "Hold her!" Solara was there. She had run from the annex, her royal robes flying. She dropped to her knees in the dirt beside them. "It is too strong," Mason yelled over the roaring silence. "I cannot anchor her." Solara looked at Nema's agonized face. She looked at Mason. Her eyes were dark with fear, but beneath the fear was a steel resolve. She reached out. "Do not," Mason warned. "You will get pulled in." "She is my daughter," Solara screamed. The truth hung in the air for a split second before Solara slammed her hands onto Nema's chest, right over Mason's hands. The contact completed a circuit. Mason felt a jolt of electricity surge through him, not from Nema, but from Solara. He gasped. He suddenly felt everything. For a brief, terrifying second, the human wall broke. He felt Solara's terror, her overwhelming love, her crushing responsibility. And she felt him, his stubbornness, his simple, fierce desire to protect his warmth. The three of them formed a triangle. The null hymn roared around them, a hurricane of void. But in the center where their hands met, there was a sudden, absolute stillness. Nema gasped, her eyes flying open. She stared up at them, her mother and the library assistant. The flashing stopped. Her skin settled into a soft, steady gold. The wave passed. The lights in the dome flickered back on. Solara pulled her hands back as if burned. She fell back onto the grass chest, heaving. She stared at Mason, her eyes wide with shock. She had felt his mind. She had felt the quiet of him. Mason sat there holding a conscious, breathing Nema. He looked at Solara. He saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. He saw the moment the fear turned into something else. She stood up. She smoothed her dirty robes. She looked down at Mason, and for the first time, she did not look at him like a tool. She looked at him like a dangerous weapon that she had just realized she did not know how to unload. "Take her inside," Solara said, her voice trembling slightly. "And Mason looked up. "Do not speak of what just happened," she whispered. "To anyone." As Mason carried Nema away, he looked back. Solara was still standing in the ruined garden watching him. But she wasn't alone. High up on a balcony overlooking the scene, Regent Rook stood in the shadows. He had seen it all. He had seen the Emperor touch the human. He had seen the triad. Rook smiled, and this time there was no humor in it. He raised his wristcom. "Initiate Phase 2, Rook said. "The infection has spread to the throne." The diagnostic scanner hummed with a sound that reminded Mason of a mosquito trapped in a bottle. It hovered over his chest, projecting a fan of emerald light that dissected his heartbeat into floating graphs of data. Mason sat on the edge of the biobed in the Royal Infirmary, swinging his legs. He was bored. He had been sitting there for 2 hours, while Dr. Soren Vale and Emperor Solara stared at monitors discussing his physiology as if he were a particularly interesting fungus. "His cortisol levels remain flat," Dr. Vale muttered, adjusting his spectacles. "Even with the ambient choir resonance at level 7 within the spire, his neural pathways are completely insulated. It is statistically improbable." "It is not probability," Solara said. She was standing by the main console, her back to Mason. She wore a high-collared tunic of silver weave that looked stiff and uncomfortable. "It is biology. He is a void." "I can hear you, you know," Mason said. "I am right here. I am not a specimen in a jar." Solara turned. Her face was a mask of cool efficiency, but Mason noticed the faint dark circles under her eyes. The null hymn had been cycling every 4 hours for the last 3 days, and every time it hit, Solara had to mentally brace the entire city's infrastructure. She looked like a statue made of tired marble. "We are not treating you as a specimen, Mr. Hale," Solara said. "We are attempting to quantify your utility. If we can isolate the frequency of your dampening effect, we might be able to replicate it synthetically." "You want to bottle me," Mason corrected. "You want to turn me into a pill, so you do not have to deal with the actual person." Solara walked over to him. She held a datapad in her hand, scrolling through columns of numbers. "Personal interaction is inefficient. Data is reliable. Your heart rate slows when Nima is present. Your skin temperature rises by 0.4 degrees. These are metrics of compatibility." Mason hopped off the bed. He was a head taller than her, broad and solid in a room full of delicate instruments. "That is not compatibility, Your Highness. That is called caring. I know it is a foreign concept around here, but on Earth, we do not need a graph to tell us when we like someone." Solara looked up at him. For a moment, the scanner's green light caught the sharp angle of her cheekbone. She lowered the datapad. "You are difficult," she said softly. "I am human," Mason replied. "We are messy. We are loud. And we do not fit in your spreadsheets." A tremor passed through the floor. It was faint but unmistakable. The lights in the room flickered. Solara flinched. Her hand flew to her temple, her eyes squeezing shut. A gasp escaped her lips, sharp and pained. The null hymn was starting its cycle. To Mason, it was just a drop in air pressure. To Solara, it was the sound of 1,000,000 minds screaming in unison. She stumbled. Mason caught her. His hands gripped her upper arms, steadying her. He felt the tension vibrating through her body, her muscles coiled tight as wire. "Breathe," Mason said, his voice dropping to that calm, low register he used with Nima. "Look at me. Not at the noise. Look at me." Solara opened her eyes. They were swimming with pain, the irises shifting rapidly from blue to a panicked violet. She stared at Mason's chest, focusing on the rough fabric of his gray uniform. "It is loud," she whispered. "I know," Mason said. "But I am not. Focus on the quiet. I am right here." He did not let go. He held her there in the center of the sterile white room, acting as a human anchor. Slowly, the violet faded from her eyes, replaced by her usual cool blue. Her breathing leveled out. She realized their proximity. She was leaning against him, her hands clutching his forearms. It was an appalling breach of protocol. No one touched the Emperor. She pulled back, smoothing her silver tunic with trembling hands. She did not look at him. "The cycle has passed," she said, her voice regaining its steel, though it was brittle. Mason noticed that the top clasp of her tunic had come undone during her stumble, revealing the hollow of her throat. Without thinking, he reached out. Solara froze. She watched his hand approach. She did not pull away. Mason fastened the clasp. His knuckles brushed against her skin. It was warm, feverishly so. "You are burning up," Mason murmured. He adjusted the collar, his movements efficient and gentle. "You are trying to hold up the sky, Solara. Even Atlas got a break eventually." Solara looked at him. The distance between them was less than a foot. The air in the room felt thick, charged with something that was definitely not the null hymn. "You are a variable," Solara said, her voice barely a whisper. "You introduce chaos into my equations. You are insubordinate. You are messy." "And," Mason asked, his hand lingering on her shoulder for a second longer than necessary. "And," Solara said, a flicker of something dangerously human crossing her face, "you are a variable I do not wish to correct." She stepped back, the moment shattering like glass. "Return to the annex," she ordered, turning her back on him. "Nima requires her midday meal." Mason watched her for a moment. He wanted to say something, but he knew better. He turned and walked out, leaving the emperor alone with her machines and her silence. The palace annex had a garden known as the Glass Garden. It was a masterpiece of Aurelian horticulture. The trees were made of translucent crystal that chimed in the wind, and the flowers were sculpted from living light. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and Mason hated it. It was cold. It was hard. You could not sit on the grass without bruising yourself. He found Nima sitting on a bench made of polished quartz. She was staring at a datapad, but she wasn't reading. She was tapping her foot against the base of the bench. Tap, tap, tap. Mason approached quietly. He carried a brown paper bag smuggled in from the lower city containing actual food, not the geometric nutrient shapes the palace served. He sat down next to her. Nima looked up. Her eyes brightened. "I figured out something," Mason said. He opened the bag. The crinkle of the paper was loud in the crystal silence. Nima's head tilted. She watched his hands. She watched the paper crinkle. A look of intense satisfaction washed over her face. "You like the noise," Mason said, realizing it for the first time. Not the choir noise. Physical noise. Analog noise. He crumpled the paper into a ball and then smoothed it out. Crinkle. Snap. Nima closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Her skin glowed a soft, happy amber. To an Aurelian whose world was a constant telepathic wash of emotion, a simple, sharp, physical sound must have felt like scratching an itch. It was defined. It had a beginning and an end. It was real. "Okay," Mason smiled. "I can work with that." Work. He started unpacking the lunch. He exaggerated the sounds. He popped the lid of the container. He snapped the plastic fork. He tapped his boots on the crystal floor in a syncopated rhythm. Nima began to sway. She mimicked him, tapping her fingers on the bench. For 20 minutes they sat there, making a small, chaotic symphony of human noises in the silent garden. Mason's comm unit buzzed against his wrist. He glanced at it. It was a text message. Encryption level low. Sender unknown. Mason knew who it was. Only one person had his private frequency code. "Do not let them buy you, son. A golden cage is still a cage. And do not let them use your kindness as a leash. If they are keeping you close, it is because they need something you have, or they are afraid of what you know." Mason read the message twice. A leash. He looked at Nima. She was happily chewing on a piece of contraband bread, swinging her legs. Was she the leash? Was this whole setup, the quarters, the access, the proximity to the emperor, just a way to keep him pacified while they studied him? "Enjoying the acoustics, Mr. Hale." The voice was smooth, cultured, and dripped with venom. Mason hit the screen of his comm unit, darkening it. He stood up. Regent Alden Rook was walking down the garden path. He wore robes of deep crimson velvet, a stark contrast to the pale crystal around them. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his silver tattoos seemed to writhe on his skin like living snakes. Nima froze. She stopped eating. She shrank into herself, her amber glow fading instantly to a fearful gray. "Regent," Mason said, stepping between Rook and the bench. "At ease," Rook said, waving a hand. "I am merely taking a stroll. The Emperor permits me the use of her gardens, though I find them quaint. Too much transparency. I prefer stone. It keeps secrets better." Rook stopped a few feet away. He looked at Mason, then at Nima, then back to Mason. His eyes were intelligent and cruel. "You have done wonders with the invalid," Rook noted. "She looks almost functional." "Her name is Nima," Mason said. "And she is not an invalid. She is a child." "She is a dissonance," Rook corrected. "But you seem to have a talent for soothing dissonance. It is a rare gift. The Emperor relies on it heavily. Perhaps too heavily." Rook took a step closer. He lowered his voice, making it intimate, conspiratorial. "Tell me, Mr. Hale, has she told you why—" "Why what?" Mason asked. "Why are you here?" Rook said. Why does she keep you in the annex fed and watered like a prize stallion? Do you think it is gratitude? Do you think she enjoys your charming rustic wit?" Mason crossed his arms. "I think she wants her kid to stop hurting." Rook laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. "Oh, you poor, simple creature. You think this is about maternal affection? Solara is an emperor. Emperors do not have the luxury of affection. They deal in assets. And right now, you are the most valuable asset she owns. You are the only thing keeping her secret from destroying her reign." "What secret?" Mason demanded. Rook smiled. "Ask her. If she truly values you as a partner, she will tell you. But she will not. She will keep you in the dark, she will accept your clumsy little kindnesses, and she will use you until you are dry. That is what we do, Mr. Hale. We rule." Rook bowed mockingly to Nima, who was trembling on the bench. "Good afternoon, little glitch," he said. He turned and walked away, his crimson robes sweeping over the crystal grass. Mason stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the message on his wrist. A leash. He looked at Nima. She was terrified. "It is okay," Mason said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "He is gone." But the doubt was not gone. It had taken root, cold and sharp. Night fell over Meridian. The null hymn was a low, constant thrumming in the air, like a headache that wouldn't go away. Mason marched through the corridors of the spire. He ignored the servant drones. He ignored the guards who looked at him with disdain. He headed straight for the private sector. He found Solara in the temporary throne room. It was a smaller chamber used for private audiences. In the center of the room, hovering on a pedestal of light, was the royal signet, a complex geometric artifact that pulsed with the heartbeat of the choir. Solara was standing in front of it. She was not wearing her armor or her official robes. She wore a simple gown of white silk. She looked small against the vastness of the room. She heard him come in. She did not turn. "You are not permitted here at this hour, Mason," she said. Her voice was weary. "I am done with permission," Mason said. His voice echoed off the walls. "And I am done with being a dampener or a battery or whatever metric you have assigned to me today." Solara turned slowly. "You are upset. Did Rook speak to you?" "He did," Mason said. "But this is not about him. This is about you, and me, and Nima." He walked toward her, stopping only when he was close enough to see the fatigue etched into her face. "Who is she, Solara?" Mason asked. "Do not give me the ward of the state line. Do not give me the random orphan story. You look at her like she is your heart walking around outside your body. But you hide her. You treat her like a dirty secret." "She is safe here," Solara said defensively. "That is all that matters." "Safe?" Mason laughed bitterly. "She is a prisoner and so am I. You have got us both locked up in this glass cage. Rook said you are using me. He said I am a tool to keep your secret. Is he right?" Solara flinched. The accusation hit home. "It is not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," Mason yelled. "I am a human being, Solara. I have a life. I have a father who is worried sick about me. I am not your pet. If you want my help, if you want me to stay, you owe me the truth. Right now. Or I walk." "You cannot walk," Solara said. "The null hymn." "To hell with the null hymn," Mason shouted. The shout rang through the room. The royal signet on the pedestal flared violently. The air pressure dropped. Solara stumbled back, clutching her chest. The stress of the confrontation combined with the ambient resonance was breaking her shielding. She gasped, her knees buckling. Mason moved on instinct. He reached out and caught her before she hit the floor. He pulled her up, but she did not stand. She collapsed against him, burying her face in his chest. She was shaking uncontrollably. "Quiet," she gasped into his shirt. "Please, just quiet." Mason stood there, holding the most powerful woman on the moon. He was angry. He was furious. But he could feel her pain radiating off her like heat from a furnace. It was a physical weight. He wrapped his arms around her. He hated himself for doing it, but he did it. He breathed slowly, forcing his own heart rate to slow down, creating that pocket of silence she was desperate for. They stood there for a long minute. The signet's pulsing slowed. The room stabilized. Solara did not pull away this time. She stayed there, her forehead resting against his collarbone. She smelled of rain and ozone. "I cannot lose her," Solara whispered. She pulled back slowly. She looked up at Mason. Her eyes were wet. "You want the truth?" she asked. Her voice was raw. "Fine, look." She turned and waved her hand at the signet. The artifact spun, projecting a holographic genealogy tree into the air. At the top was Solara, and directly below her, connected by a thick, glowing line of succession, was a single name: Princess Nima Ethelgard. Mason stared at the name. The air left his lungs. "She is not a ward," Solara said, her voice trembling. "She is my daughter. She is the heir apparent to the Meridian throne." Mason looked at Solara. "Your daughter, but the council, Rook, they treat her like a mistake," Solara finished. "Because she was born with the null defect. Oral and royalty are supposed to be the strongest conductors of the choir. Nima breaks the choir. If the council knew she was my blood, if they knew the heir was defective, they would invoke the ancient laws." "What laws?" Mason asked, dread pooling in his stomach. "Purification," Solara whispered. "They would execute her, to protect the integrity of the collective." Mason stepped back. He felt like he had been punched. "You knew," Mason said. "You knew all along. You saw me helping her in the cafeteria, and you didn't see a nice guy. You saw a life support system for your dynasty." "I saw a way to keep my child alive," Solara cried, tears finally spilling over. "Yes, I used you, I brought you here because you are the only thing in this universe that stops her pain. I am a Mother Mason. What would you have done?" "I would have asked," Mason roared. "I would have trusted me. I didn't need to be manipulated, Solara. I would have helped you because it was the right thing to do, but you treated me like equipment." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I cannot do this. I cannot be your secret weapon." "Mason," Solara pleaded, reaching out. Suddenly, a scream tore through the room. It was not a physical scream. It was a psychic shockwave, so powerful it cracked the floor tiles. "Nima!" Solara gasped. Mason felt it too, a sudden crushing pressure in his ears. They ran. They sprinted through the corridors back to the annex. The air was heavy, vibrating with the intensity of the null hymn. But this was different. This wasn't a natural wave. This was a spike. They burst into Nima's room. She was on the floor. She was not just seizing. She was floating. Gravity around her had collapsed. Furniture was swirling in a chaotic vortex. Nima's body was arched back, her skin blazing with a blinding white light that was burning the tapestries on the walls. "She sensed our conflict," Solara horrified, shielding her eyes from the glare. "The choir, she felt my anger and your betrayal. It amplified the null hymn. She is resonating with us." "Turn it off," Mason yelled, shielding his face. "I cannot," Solara shouted. "She is too far gone. If I touch her now, the feedback will kill us both." Mason looked at the girl, floating in the center of the psychic storm. She looked small. She looked terrified. He didn't think about the lie. He didn't think about the manipulation or the politics or the fact that she was a princess who could one day order his execution. He just saw the kid who liked the sound of crinkling paper. "Nima!" Mason yelled. He dove into the vortex. A chair hit him in the shoulder hard. He ignored it. The psychic pressure was like walking into a wall of wind. His nose started to bleed. The sheer volume of emotion, Solara's fear, Nima's pain, his own anger was trying to crush his brain. He reached up and grabbed Nima's ankle. "Gotcha," he grunted. He pulled her down. Gravity fought him, but he was stronger. He dragged her out of the air and slammed her onto the bed. He threw his body over hers, pinning her down. "Listen to me," Mason shouted into her ear. "Listen to my voice, not the noise. Listen to me." He started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. He tapped his hand on the bedframe. Thump, thump, thump. A steady physical rhythm. Beneath him, Nima screamed a sound of pure agony. But then she felt the thump. She felt the heavy, solid weight of the human on top of her. Mason pressed his forehead against hers. "I am here. I am not going anywhere. I am right here." Slowly, the white light faded. The floating furniture crashed to the floor. The screaming wind died down to a whimper. Nima went limp. She was sobbing now, quiet human sobs. Mason rolled off her, gasping for air. He wiped the blood from his nose. He lay there on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his chest heaving. Silence returned to the room. Solara stood in the doorway. She was trembling. She had watched the whole thing. She had watched a human man walk through a psychic fire that would have incinerated an Orlan high priest just to comfort her daughter. She walked over to the bed. She did not look at Nima. She looked at Mason. There was no calculation in her eyes anymore. No metrics. No data. Just awe. "You," Solara whispered. "It is not biology." Mason sat up, groaning as his shoulder throbbed. "What?" the dampening Solara said. "It is not just because you are human. It is because you choose to be there. The machines cannot measure choice. They cannot measure sacrifice." She reached out and touched Mason's face. Her fingers were cool against his flushed skin. She wiped a smudge of blood from his cheek. "I am sorry," Solara said, and for the first time she sounded like she meant it. "I should have told you. I was afraid." Mason looked at her. The anger was still there, but it was softer now. "Fear makes us do stupid things. Just do not do it again." He looked at Nima, who had curled up into a ball and fallen into an exhausted sleep. "She needs us," Mason said. "Both of us. Not as an emperor and a dampener. As whatever we are." Solara nodded. She sat down on the edge of the bed. "We are in trouble, Mason. Rook, if he knows you are this effective, he will know why." Regent Rook stood in the observation spire, looking down at the data feeds. The spike in the annex had been catastrophic, but it had been contained, again, by the human. Rook tapped his fingers on the console. "He knows," Rook murmured to himself. "He knows she is the heir. Solara has shown him the signet. I can see the energy signature." He turned to his aide, a faceless drone in the shadows. "The human has crossed the line," Rook said. "He is no longer a pet. He is a conspirator." Rook keyed in a command code. It was a sequence that had been forbidden for 300 years. "Override the safety dampeners on the planetary shield," Rook ordered. "Open the choir frequencies to full sensitivity." "Regent," the aide's mechanical voice hesitated. "That will increase the null hymn severity by 300%. It could cause mass casualties." "It will cause chaos," Rook smiled. "And in chaos, people look for a savior. And they look for a scapegoat. We will give them both." He pressed the execute button. "Let the music play," Rook whispered. "Let us see if the human can hold up the sky when it is actually falling." The first warning was not a siren. The Palace of Meridian did not use sirens. Sirens were discordant, and the Orlan Empire despised discord. The first warning was that the doors forgot who they were. Mason Hale was in the corridor leading to the annex, carrying a toolbox he had retrieved from the lower maintenance levels. He approached the main blast door, a slab of bioorganic pearl that usually sensed his heat signature and dilated like a pupil. Tonight, it stayed shut. The surface of the door rippled with a sickly, bruised purple light. "Open," Mason said, tapping the manual override panel. The panel sparked. A synthetic voice, warped and stuttering, echoed from the wall. Identity unrecognized. Threat level blue. No red. No silence. The lights in the hallway flickered and died. For a second, there was total darkness. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, a harsh, throbbing red that made the elegant curves of the palace look like the inside of a dying artery. That is not good, Mason muttered. He gripped the heavy wrench in his right hand. His comm unit buzzed against his wrist. It was Cora. Hail! Her voice was clipped, fighting against static. We have a breach of Sector 7-9 and the main gate. The defense grid has inverted. Inverted? Mason asked, starting to run back toward Nima's room. What does that mean? It means, Cora said, and he could hear the hum of a plasma charger in the background, that the palace is currently trying to kill anyone with a heartbeat. And we have guests. Unsanctioned dropships just breached the upper atmospheric shield. Rook is making his move. I am going to Nima, Mason said. Negative, Cora snapped. The Emperor has secured the annex. She ordered you to the panic room in the lower vault. You are a target, Hale. I am not a target, Mason growled, rounding a corner and nearly slipping on the polished floor. I am the only one who can keep the kid from exploding. Tell Solara I do not take orders well. Tell her I am coming. He killed the connection. The corridor ahead exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was a sonic charge. The air itself seemed to shatter. Mason was thrown backward, sliding 20 feet across the crystalline floor. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that felt like a needle being driven into his brain. Through the smoke, figures emerged. They were not standard royal guards. They wore suits of matte black armor that absorbed the light, making them look like walking voids. Their helmets were faceless, smooth glass domes. Silencers. Rook's private elite. There were 3 of them. They moved with terrifying fluid speed, raising rifles that pulsed with suppression energy. Mason scrambled behind a decorative pillar. He looked at his wrench. He looked at the high-tech death squads. Okay, Dad, he whispered to the ghost of his father's training. You said if you cannot outgun them, outthink them. He looked up. Above the silencers, running along the ceiling, was a thick, translucent pipe, glowing with blue liquid, the biocoolant, for the palace's neural network. Mason did not hesitate. He threw the heavy wrench with all his strength. It was not a graceful throw, but it was a heavy wrench. It spiraled through the air and smashed into the pipe. The conduit burst. Gallons of freezing, viscous blue fluid rained down on the black-armored figures. The silencers froze, literally. The biocoolant was designed to keep supercomputers at 0 degrees. When it hit the heated armor of the soldiers, the thermal shock was instant. Their suits locked up, joints seizing, as the fluid hardened into a rapid-set gel. The soldiers stumbled, slipping on the slick floor, their limbs jerking mechanically as their servos whined in protest. Mason did not wait to admire his handiwork. He sprinted past them, sliding on the blue slush, and kicked the rifle out of the lead soldier's frozen hand. Sorry, he yelled over his shoulder. Maintenance issue. He rounded the corner and nearly ran headfirst into a wall of white ceramic armor. Cora stood there, her silver eyes wide. She looked at the frozen, struggling squad behind him, then at Mason. You, Cora paused, searching for the word. You neutralized a silencer squad with plumbing. It is all about pressure points, Mason panted, wiping sweat from his forehead. Where is Solara? The throne room, Cora said, falling into step beside him. She moved effortlessly, her movements precise and lethal. They did not go for the annex. They drew her out. They are trying to herd her toward the resonance chamber. Nima, Mason asked. With her, Cora said. Solara would not leave her. That is the problem. Rook knows she is distracted. He is using the girl as leverage. They ran. The palace was fighting them every step of the way. Gravity plates fluctuated, making the floor feel like the deck of a ship in a storm. Doors slammed shut, forcing Cora to slice through the locking mechanisms with her energy blade. "Why are the defenses doing this?" Mason shouted over the roar of a malfunctioning vent. "The null him," Cora yelled back. "It is not just a wave anymore. It is a code. Someone injected a dissonance virus into the central choir. The palace thinks we are the infection." They burst into the antechamber of the throne room. The scene was chaos. A dozen silencers were engaging the royal guard. Beams of coherent light slashed through the air, melting the crystal walls. The smell of ozone and burning silk was overpowering. But Mason only had eyes for the center of the room. Solara was fighting. He had seen her as a diplomat, as a tired mother, as a vulnerable woman. He had never seen her as a warrior. She was terrifying. She did not use a weapon. She used the environment. She moved like a dancer in the center of a hurricane. With a flick of her wrist, she ripped tiles from the floor and hurled them at supersonic speeds. She caught energy bolts in midair with fields of hard light and redirected them back at her attackers. But she was backing up. She was shielding something behind her. Nima was huddled against the base of a statue, her hands over her ears screaming. But there was no sound coming out. The null hymn was drowning her. "Target the child!" A voice amplified by a helmet speaker boomed. It was the silencer commander. "Extract the key." 3 black-armored soldiers broke formation, ignoring Solara, and diving for Nima. "No!" Solara screamed. She extended a hand, blasting 2 of them back with a wave of telekinetic force, but the third one slipped through. The soldier grabbed Nima by her hair. Mason saw red. He did not think. He did not plan. He just moved. He tackled the soldier. It was a clumsy, bar-fight tackle. He hit the armored figure at full speed, driving his shoulder into the midsection. They crashed to the floor, sliding across the polished stone. The soldier was strong, enhanced by hydraulics. He backhanded Mason a blow that felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. Mason tasted blood. His vision swam. The soldier raised a vibro knife, the blade humming with a frequency that could cut diamond. Thwack! A silver bolt took the soldier in the throat. He collapsed, twitching. Mason looked up. Cora stood 10 feet away, her pistol smoking. "Unconventional," she noted dryly. "But effective." Mason scrambled up. He grabbed Nima. She was burning up her skin, flashing a dangerous strobe light white. "Mason!" she gasped. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. "The room is screaming." "I have got you," Mason said, lifting her. "We have to go." "You cannot go!" Solara shouted. She was beside them in an instant, her chest heaving, her white combat robes scorched. "The exits are sealed. They are funneling us into the resonance chamber." As if on cue, the floor beneath them shuddered. The entire section of the room they were standing on detached. It was a lift platform. It plummeted. They fell into the dark, down into the bowels of the spire. The wind roared in their ears. Mason held Nima tight, bracing his legs. Solara stood tall, her hands glowing, ready for whatever waited below. The platform slammed to a halt. They were in a vast, circular room. The walls were lined with thousands of tuning forks, made of black obsidian. In the center was a single chair, hooked up to a massive pulsating machine. Regent Alden Rook stood by the machine. He was flanked by 24 silencers. "Welcome," Rook said, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the room. "To the heart of the problem." "Alden," Solara said, her voice dripping with ice. "This is treason. High treason." "This is surgery," Rook corrected. "The Empire is sick, Solara. It is infected with weakness, with sentiment. And I am cutting it out." He pointed a long, skeletal finger at Nima. "Put the girl in the chair," Rook ordered. "Over my dead body," Mason said, stepping in front of Solara and Nima. Rook laughed. "That can be arranged. But if you resist, my men will fire on the Emperor." "Are you willing to trade her life for the child's?" Mason hesitated. He looked at the 20 rifles aimed at Solara. "Do not listen to him," Solara said. "He needs Nima alive. He needs her resonance to reset the choir. I need her screaming, Rook said pleasantly. The null hymn is a frequency. If I push her through the amplifier, I can override the Council's protocols. I can wipe the collective memory of the last 5 years. I can erase the weakness. I can erase you, Solara. And when the city wakes up, they will remember only order. You are insane, Mason said. You will lobotomize the whole planet. I will save it, Rook roared, losing his composure for the first time. From this chaos you bring, look at you, a human standing in the royal spire polluting our neural pathways with your messy individualistic noise. Rook slammed his hand on the console. Seize them, the silencers advanced. Mason, Solara whispered. Can you hold her? What? Mason asked. Can you hold the silence? Solara asked. Her eyes were desperate. If I let go, if I fight them with everything I have, the psychic backlash will kill Nima. Unless you anchor her. I can hold her, Mason said. But who holds you? Solara looked at him. For a split second, there was no emperor, no guard, just a woman looking at a man she might never see again. Do not look at my wounds, she said, quoting him. Look at the road. She pushed Nima into Mason's arms. Run, she commanded. Get behind the console. Be the anchor. Then Solara exploded. Not literally, but psychically. She threw her arms wide, and a shockwave of pure golden light erupted from her body. It hit the advancing silencers, like a physical wall, throwing them back against the obsidian spikes. Mason sprinted. He carried Nima behind the massive machinery of the amplifier. He sat down, putting his back against the cold metal. Okay, kid, Mason gasped. Just you and me, like the cafeteria. Ignore the noise. Nima was convulsing. The machine behind them was powering up, feeding off the violence in the room. The obsidian tuning forks began to hum, a deep, bone-rattling vibration. It hurts, Nima screamed silently into his mind. Focus on my heartbeat, Mason said. He pressed her ear against his chest. Listen. Thump, 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 thump. He closed his eyes. He visualized a brick wall. A thick, boring, ugly brick wall. He built it around Nima. He poured all his stubbornness, all his refusal to be moved into that wall. Outside, the battle was raging. He heard the sizzle of energy bolts, the crunch of armor, and the grunts of effort. He heard Solara cry out. Mason's eyes snapped open. He shifted, peeking around the edge of the machine. Solara was on her knees. She was surrounded. The golden light around her was fading, flickering like a dying candle. She had taken down 10 men, but there were too many. Rook stood over her. He held a disruptor pistol, a weapon that scrambled the nervous system. It is over, Solara, Rook said. You fought well. For a sentimentalist. He raised the pistol, aimed at her head. Mason looked at Nima. She was stabilized. Her eyes were open, watching him. Stay here, Mason said. No, Nima whispered. Count the beats, Mason commanded. Do not stop counting. Mason stood up. He grabbed a loose metal pipe from the floor debris from the earlier explosion. He did not run. He charged. Hey, Rook! Mason yelled. Rook turned. The distraction worked. It bought 1 second. Mason swung the pipe. He wasn't aiming for Rook. He was aiming for the machine. He smashed the pipe into the cooling vents of the amplifier. Sparks showered down. The machine shrieked. The feedback loop broke. The obsidian forks shattered, exploding into razor-sharp shrapnel. Rook stumbled, shielding his face. You primitive ape, Rook screamed. He swung the pistol toward Mason and fired. The beam was purple, jagged, and lethal. Mason tried to dodge, but he was too slow. But the beam did not hit him. A figure blurred in front of him. Solara. She took the shot. It hit her in the shoulder, spinning her around. She collapsed, sliding across the floor to Mason's feet. Solara. Mason dropped the pipe and fell to his knees beside her. Her shoulder was a ruin of scorched silk and burned flesh. Her face was gray. I told you, she wheezed, her eyes unfocused. Stay secure. You jumped in front of a gun, Mason said, his voice cracking. He pressed his hands over the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, though cauterized wounds didn't bleed much. Why did you do that? Inefficient, she murmured. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. To lose the anchor, Rook recovered. He stood up, shaking glass from his robes. He looked at Solara bleeding on the floor, and his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. See, Rook spat. This is what humanity does. It makes you weak. You sacrifice the crown for a janitor. Rook raised the pistol again. I will finish this. Suddenly, the room stopped shaking. The shattered obsidian forks stopped vibrating. The light steadied, but it was not quiet. A sound began to rise. It was not the screech of the null hymn. It was a melody, a low, complex, weaving melody. Rook froze. He looked around. What is that? Mason looked toward the machine. Nima was standing up. She was not glowing with light. She was absorbing it. The shadows in the room seemed to bend toward her. She walked out from behind the broken amplifier. Her eyes were not black anymore. They were filled with stars. She looked at Rook, and she spoke. Not with her mind, with her voice. Enough, Nima said. The word hit the room like a hammer. The silencers dropped their weapons. They clutched their helmets, falling to their knees. My head, one of them screamed. The noise, it is gone, it is all gone. Rook staggered back. He looked at his datapad. His eyes widened in horror. Impossible, Rook stammered. The null hymn, it is not stopping. It is rewriting. He looked at Nima. You are not the key. You are the door. Nima took a step forward. Leave. She swept her hand. A wave of kinetic force, precise and gentle, lifted Rook and his remaining men off the ground. It threw them backward, sliding them all the way to the lift platform. The platform activated remotely. It rose, carrying the screaming regent and his squad away into the darkness of the shaft. Mason stared at Nima. He looked down at Solara, who was breathing shallowly in his arms. Nima, Mason whispered. Nima looked at him. The stars in her eyes faded, returning to black. She blinked, and suddenly she was just a scared little girl again. Her knees buckled. Mason reached out and caught her with one arm, holding Solara with the other. I counted, Nima whispered, burying her face in his neck. I counted the beats. But the machine woke up something else. The infirmary was crowded. Not with people, but with holograms. The High Council had convened. 5 shimmering blue figures floated around Solara's biobed. Solara was conscious, her arm in a regeneration sling. She looked pale, but she was sitting up. The Emperor was back. Mason stood in the corner. He had refused to leave. He was bruised, covered in blue coolant and black soot, holding a cup of lukewarm water. This is unprecedented, Councillor Vane, a tall, severe Orlan stated. Regent Rook has been detained, yes. His treason is clear. But the data, Your Highness, is terrifying. The null hymn has not ceased, another councillor said. It has stabilized, but it is autonomous now. It is no longer reacting to environmental stress. It is waiting. And the source, Councillor Vane pointed a spectral finger at Mason. Is he? Mason looked up. Me. The human influence, Vane said. The Regent was mad, but his initial theory holds merit. Your presence has altered the development of the air. You have taught the choir to improvise, to deviate. The null hymn is now a reflection of your chaotic psychology. He saved the air, Solara said, her voice cutting through the room. He saved me. He saved the bodies, Vane countered. But he has endangered the soul of Meridian. The choir cannot function with this level of individuality. It will fragment. We will become isolated. Like them. He gestured at Mason with disgust. The Council's decision is preliminary but firm, Vane announced. Regent Rook will be executed. But the human Mason Hale must be expelled. Immediately. He is a pathogen. He stays, Solara said. The counselors went silent. Your Highness, Vane said slowly. You are weak from your injuries. You are not thinking clearly. I am thinking clearer than I have in years, Solara said. She looked at Mason. Vane drew himself up. If you refuse the Council's recommendation on a matter of planetary safety, we will be forced to invoke the competency clause. We will vote to suspend your authority until the crisis is resolved. It was a threat. A coup by bureaucracy. Mason crushed the paper cup in his hand. He stepped forward. Hey, Mason said. The holograms turned to look at him. You talk about me like I am a virus, Mason said. But your perfect system just tried to lobotomize itself. Rook was one of you. He was the product of your choir. I am the pathogen. I am the only reason you still have an emperor. He turned to Solara. She was looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. She looked trapped. She was the emperor, yes, but she was also a servant of the law. If the council voted, she would lose everything. Nima would be taken. Mason saw the hesitation. He saw her weighing the options. The crown, or the man, the system, or the family. Solara, Mason said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Do not ask me, Solara whispered. Please, Mason, do not ask. I have to, Mason said. They are right about one thing. I do not fit. I cannot be a part-time secret and a full-time threat. He walked up to the edge of the bed. He ignored the indignant gasps of the counselors. You have to choose, Mason said. Do you want the throne or do you want the truth, because you cannot keep both? Not anymore. Mason, Solara said, tears welling in her eyes. If I lose the throne, I cannot protect Nima. If you keep the throne on their terms, Mason said, gesturing to the holograms, you will never protect her. You will just be her jailer. He waited. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the medical equipment. Solara looked at the council. She looked at Nima, sleeping in the next bed. She looked at Mason. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She closed it. She looked down at her hands. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. It was too long. Mason nodded slowly. He felt a cold weight settle in his chest. It wasn't surprise. It was just disappointment. Okay, Mason said. I understand. Mason, wait, Solara said, reaching out with her good hand. Mason stepped back out of her reach. I am not going to be expelled, Mason said to the counselors. I am resigning, but I am not leaving the planet. My father is here. My life is here. You will be restricted to the lower sectors, Vane decreed. You will have no contact with the spire, no contact with the air. Mason looked at Solara one last time. Good luck, Your Highness. Try not to let the sky fall. He turned and walked out of the infirmary. He expected Solara to call him back. He expected her to order the guards to stop him. He expected her to choose him. But the door hissed shut behind him, and the only sound that followed him down the long, empty corridor was the echo of his own boots. And somewhere deep in the subsonic range, the null hymn began to change its rhythm again. It wasn't screaming anymore. It was laughing. The hall of resonance did not smell like a courtroom. It smelled like a thunderstorm that had been holding its breath for 1,000 years. Mason Hale stood in the center of a circular platform made of suspended obsidian. Above him, the ceiling arched high into the darkness, lined with rows of silent, shimmering Aurelin spectators. Below him, a pit of pure white light hummed with a low, threatening frequency. He was tired. His gray utility uniform was stained with blue coolant fluid and soot from the battle in the spire. His shoulder throbbed where the silencer had hit him. But he stood straight, his hands loose at his sides, refusing to look like a prisoner. Mason Hale, a voice boomed from the high podiums. It was Counselor Vane. You stand before the High Council of Meridian. You are charged with contamination of the collective consciousness, unauthorized manipulation of the royal air, and inciting dissonance within the choir." Mason looked up at the counselors. They were seated on floating thrones of glass, their faces impassive, their eyes glowing with the unified light of the choir. To his right, in a separate containment field, stood Regent Alden Rook. Rook looked battered, his crimson robes torn, one arm in a sling. He had survived the fall down the shaft. Oralin physiology was annoyingly resilient, and the council, in their infinite bureaucratic wisdom, had decided to hear his testimony before executing him. They feared a human infection more than they feared a traitorous Oralin. Rook smiled at Mason. It was a thin, bloodless smile. "The human is not merely a contaminant," Rook said, his voice smooth and amplified. "He is a weapon. Look at the data. Since his arrival at the Spire, the null hymn has increased in frequency by 40%. He disrupts the natural order. He introduces chaos." Mason sighed. He looked around at the theatrical setup. The beam of light hitting him was hot and blinded him slightly. "If you want me to disappear," Mason said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber, "you could just ask. You do not need to put me under a spotlight. I feel like I am expected to perform a tap dance." A ripple of unease went through the spectators. Humor was discordant. It did not fit the rhythm. "Silence," Counselor Vane commanded. "You do not speak until spoken to. The evidence is clear. When you are near the air, her connection to the choir drops to 0. You are severing her from her people. You are making her alien." "I am making her happy," Mason shot back. "I know that is a difficult metric for you to track on your spreadsheets, but usually, when a kid stops screaming, that is considered a good thing." "Happiness is a subjective illusion," Rook interjected smoothly. "Stability is objective, and you, Mr. Hale, are the definition of instability. You have seduced the Emperor with your primitive biology. You have turned the throne against the Council." Rook turned to the Council, his eyes gleaming. "I propose a solution," Rook said. "We cannot merely expel him. The memory of him will linger in the heir's mind, continuing to cause infection. We must sever the bond. We must excise the memory of the human from both the heir and the Emperor. A surgical removal of the discord." Mason felt a chill run down his spine. "You want to wipe their minds." "We want to clean the choir," Rook corrected. "Solara," Mason yelled, ignoring the guard stepping forward. "Are you going to let them do this?" Solara sat on the highest throne, separated from the council. She wore the full ceremonial armor of the Emperor Gold, and white, heavy, and imposing. Her face was pale. She looked like a statue. She had been silent for the entire trial. The council had invoked the competency clause, freezing her authority until the verdict was rendered. "The Emperor cannot speak," Vane said dismissively. "She is compromised." "She is not compromised," Mason shouted. "She is the only one in this room who is actually awake." He pointed at Rook. "This man tried to kill her. He tried to turn your precious heir into a battery, and you are listening to him because he uses the right buzzwords, because he looks like you." "We listen to logic," Vane said, "and logic dictates that the anomaly must be removed." Vane raised his hand. The light in the pit below Mason began to brighten. It was a containment field. It was getting hotter. "Mason Hale," Vane intoned. "Prepare for extraction." "Stop." The word was not shouted. It was spoken with a quiet, terrifying weight. Solara stood up. She did not look at the council. She reached up and unclasped the heavy golden cape from her shoulders. It fell to the floor with a heavy metallic clang. She took off the ceremonial helmet. She let it drop. It rolled across the glass platform, spinning noisily. "Your Highness," Vane warned, "this is a breach of protocol." "I am done with protocol," Solara said. She walked down the steps of the podium. Every step she took echoed in the silence. She walked until she reached the edge of the pit where Mason stood. She signaled the guards to lower the field. They hesitated, looking at Vane. "Lower it," Solara commanded. Her voice was not the voice of the choir. It was the voice of a mother who had run out of patience. The field dropped. Solara stepped onto the obsidian platform. She stood next to Mason. She looked at him, and her eyes were filled with a profound, aching regret. "I lied to you," Solara said, her voice amplified, so the whole hall could hear. "I told you I brought you to the palace because you were a dampener. Because you were useful." "I know," Mason said softly. "But that is not why I kept you," Solara continued, turning to face the council. "I used him. Yes. I treated him like a tool because I was terrified. I thought that if I admitted I needed help, the sky would fall. I thought that if I showed weakness, Meridian would crumble." She looked at Rook. "But you were right, Alden," she said. "He is an infection. He infected me. He taught me that a ruler who cannot feel pain cannot understand her people. He taught me that a mother who sacrifices her child for the state deserves neither." Solara took Mason's hand. The gasp from the audience was audible. Physical touch in a public court was scandalous. "I am not compromised," Solara declared. "I am finally whole, and I will not let you touch him." "Then you will fall with him," Rook sneered. "Counselors, the Emperor has abandoned the choir. She chooses the discord, invoke the nullification." Vane looked torn, but the fear in the room was palpable. The choir was agitated. The mental pressure was rising. "Solara," Vane said, "step away from the human. This is your last warning." "No," Solara said. "Then we have no choice," Vane said. He raised his hand to signal the guards. "Wait." The new voice was small, but it cut through the tension like a bell. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. Nima walked in. She was not wearing the heavy robes of state. She wore a simple tunic. She walked with a slight limp, but her head was held high. She was alone. No guards, no attendants. "Nima," Solara gasped, taking a step forward. "Go back." Nima ignored her mother. She walked straight down the center aisle. The crowd parted for her, terrified of the glitch girl. She walked onto the platform. She stood between Solara and Mason. She looked at the council. Her big black eyes were wide, but she wasn't shaking. "I want to speak," Nima said. "The heir is not permitted to address the council until the Age of Ascension," Rook snapped. "Take her away." "I said I want to speak," Nima shouted. And then she did something impossible. She opened her mind. Usually, when Nima connected to the choir, it was a disaster. It was a scream of static and pain that knocked people unconscious. But this time, there was no scream. Mason felt it first. He was human. He couldn't hear the choir, but he could feel the pressure change. The air in the room suddenly felt like rain. It felt like the smell of ozone right before a storm breaks. It was fresh. It was clean. The counselors grabbed their heads, not in pain, but in shock. "What is she doing?" Vane stammered. "She is not projecting noise," Solara whispered, staring at her daughter. "She is projecting a beat." Nima closed her eyes. She began to tap her hand against her thigh. Thump, thump, thump. It was the rhythm Mason had taught her, the rhythm of a human heart. She broadcasted that rhythm into the neural network of every Orlan in the room. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow. It was steady. It was imperfect. And it was beautiful. The chaotic noise of the thousands of minds in the hall began to synchronize. They latched onto the beat. The frantic buzzing of the choir slowed down. The fear evaporated. "It is quiet," a spectator whispered. "But we are still connected." Nima opened her eyes. She looked at Mason. She smiled. "I am not broken," she said. Rook stared at her. His face twisted in horror. He saw his power slipping away. He saw the tool of control, the fear of the null hymn, dissolving into a melody he couldn't conduct. "No," Rook hissed. "This is a trick. It is a pollution. She is infecting the entire council." He reached into his sling. He pulled out a device. It was a jagged shard of black crystal, a piece of the amplifier he had salvaged. "If the system will not purge the infection," Rook screamed, "then I will crash the system." He crushed the crystal in his hand. It wasn't a bomb. It was a trigger. The Hall of Resonance was built on top of the planet's primary choir node. Rook had just short-circuited it. The lights exploded. The null hymn hit. But it didn't hit from the outside. It erupted from the floor. A pillar of black psychic fire blasted upward from the pit. It engulfed the platform. "Mason!" Solara screamed. The pain was instant. It felt like being boiled alive. Mason fell to his knees. The sound was deafening, a screeching, tearing noise that felt like the universe ripping in half. "It is destroying us!" Vane shrieked. The counselors were writhing on their thrones. In the center of the fire, Mason found himself blind and deaf. He reached out. He felt a small hand. Nima. He felt a slender, strong hand. Solara. "Hold on!" Mason yelled, though he couldn't hear his own voice. "Hold on to me!" He pulled them together. The three of them huddled in the center of the psychic inferno. And then the plot twist happened. As Mason's human heartbeat hammered against Nima's chest, and as Solara's royal blood resonated with them both, the null hymn changed. It didn't stop. It opened. Mason suddenly wasn't in the courtroom anymore. He was everywhere. He was inside a vast, infinite library of light. He saw history. He saw the history of the Orlan people. He saw that millions of years ago, the Orlan were not a hive mind. They were individuals. They fought. They loved. They killed. They created art. Then they built the choir to stop the wars. They engineered a peace so perfect it became a prison. They merged their minds to ensure empathy, but in doing so they lost the ability to choose kindness. Kindness became automatic. Love became a calculation. And the royal signet, the crown, was not a ruler's tool. It was a failsafe. It was an ancient, biological computer program designed to wake up if the species became too stagnant. If the choir became a flat line of perfect order, the signet would trigger the null hymn. It wasn't a sickness. It was a reboot sequence. It was trying to reintroduce individuality. But the program was missing a key. It needed a template. It needed a mind that knew how to be individual, how to be lonely, how to choose love despite fear. It needed a mind that wasn't part of the choir. It needed a human. Nima wasn't sick. She was the hardware. She was built to run the update. Mason wasn't the dampener. He was the software. He was the data source. "I see it," Solara gasped. Her voice was in his head, clear and terrified. "The null hymn is not attacking us. It is asking a question." "What question?" Mason thought back. "It is asking," Nima's voice chimed in, sounding old and ancient and powerful, "if we still want to be free." Rook was screaming in the distance. He was part of the old system. The reboot was deleting his authority. He was being overwritten. "Mason," Solara said, "we have to answer. Together." "How?" Mason asked. "By choosing," Solara said. "By choosing each other. Not because of duty, not because of the choir, but because we want to." Mason thought of his father waiting in the cafeteria. He thought of the lunch tray. He thought of Solara's tired eyes in the garden. He thought of Nima tapping her foot. He didn't think about saving the world. He thought about saving them. "I choose you," Mason thought. "I choose this family." "I choose you," Solara echoed. "I choose us," Nima finished. The three of them squeezed their hands together. The black fire turned white, then gold, then a color that didn't have a name. The blast wave swept through the hall. It swept through the spire. It swept through Meridian. It didn't knock people down. It woke them up. For the first time in 5,000 years, every Orlan on the moon suddenly felt quiet. The constant noise of a million other minds faded into a background hum. They could still hear it if they listened, but they didn't have to. They were alone in their own heads. Silence. Beautiful private silence. In the hall of resonance, the light faded. Mason was lying on the obsidian floor. He was gasping for air. Every nerve in his body felt like it had been scrubbed with wire wool. He opened his eyes. Solara was lying next to him. She was staring at the ceiling. She was crying. "I cannot hear them," she whispered. "I cannot hear what they are thinking about my hair. I cannot hear their fear. I am just me." Nima sat up. She looked radiant. Her skin wasn't flashing anymore. It was a steady, warm, human-like pinkish gold. She looked at Rook. Rook was sitting on the floor of his containment cell. He looked small. He looked confused. He looked at his hands. "I am alone," Rook whispered. The terror in his voice was absolute. "There is no one here but me." For a man who wanted total control, absolute solitude was the ultimate punishment. Mason sat up. He groaned. His joints popped. "Did we win?" Mason asked. Solara sat up. She looked at the counselors. They were looking at each other, touching their faces, realizing they were individuals again. Solara looked at Mason. She reached out and touched his face. "We didn't win," she said, a smile breaking through her tears. "We evolved." 2 weeks later. The cafeteria at the Diplomatic Academy was loud, but it was good loud. It was the sound of people talking, laughing, and arguing. Mason Hale was scrubbing table 12. "You know," a voice said behind him, "the Emperor's consort is generally not expected to handle industrial solvents." Mason turned around. Solara stood there. She wasn't wearing armor. She was wearing a simple blue dress that looked suspiciously like something Earth fashion would produce. She looked rested. She looked younger. "I am not the consort," Mason said, dipping his sponge. "I am the second voice. And the second voice says this table is sticky," Solara laughed. It was a sound that still made the students stop and stare. "The council is still arguing about the new constitution," Solara said, leaning against the table. "They want to know if they can turn the choir back up to 50%. They say people are getting lonely." "Tell them to buy dogs," Mason said. "Loneliness builds character." "Nima misses you," Solara said softly. "She is doing well with the training. She can conduct the choir now. She helps people connect when they want to and disconnect when they need to sleep. She is a good conductor." "She learned from the best," Mason said. "Me and my lunch tray." Solara stepped closer. She put her hand over his hand, stopping him from scrubbing. "Grant is asking when you are coming home for dinner," she said. "He said he made the red stuff." "Is he still threatening to sue the Empire for emotional distress?" "He settled for a lifetime supply of vintage Earth coffee," Solara smiled. She looked at him. The connection between them was still there. It wasn't the overwhelming telepathy of the old choir. It was something subtler. It was the warm, steady hum of two people who knew each other's darkest secrets and stayed anyway. "Are you done scrubbing?" Solara asked. "For today," Mason said. "Why?" "Because," Solara said, taking the sponge from his hand and dropping it into the bucket with a splash. "I have a meeting with the trade delegation from the Earth Coalition, and I need my specialist in human stubbornness to advise me." "Is that my official title?" "No," Solara said. She reached up and fixed his collar. "Your official title is Mason. Just Mason." "I like that," Mason said. "I know," Solara replied. "I felt you like it." She took his arm. They walked out of the cafeteria together. They walked past the students who were no longer afraid to touch past the windows that looked out on a city that was finally learning how to sleep. Above them, the sky of Meridian was still purple, and the moons still glowed. But the air didn't smell like fear anymore. It smelled like rain. Real rain. "By the way," Mason said as they reached the door, You still owe me 5,000 credits for overtime. Solara rolled her eyes. I will dock it from your royal allowance. I have a royal allowance. We are negotiating it, she said. Mason smiled. He pushed the door open for her. After you, Your Highness. After you, Mason. They walked out into the light side by side, two separate people walking in the same direction.